Hello everyone and welcome to Nerds Fail Me. I'm Chris Kenner and I've got Karma here with me.
Hey.
And today we're going to have a little bit of a talk about how there are too many numbers in some old games.
It's not so much that we're against the numbers, but it's more that there's a lot of focus on the numbers.
You know, and I get that. Like I'm a very numbersy person. I have a degree that in games programming and mathematics. I'm a data analyst for a living. Numbers are a huge part of my life.
And I'm the opposite.
Yeah,
the complete and utter opposite.
Mm-hmm. So we have a sort of quite a diametrically opposed way of seeing things. So I can see like a really old building, and I can have a reasonable guess at how much it weighs in tons. But then Karma will be like, that was made in the Georgian period, and I look at it and it's just it's shapes. How do you tell from those shapes that this was made sort of particularly about 150 years ago? It's magic.
Yeah, it's more about how the shapes are put together and what they're made out of.
Yeah, and I can't understand the world around me like that. And this is the same in games. So you'll have specifically we're thinking about MMORPGs. So if you go and play World of Warcraft is a game primarily of numbers. You have to have the biggest numbers because your numbers have to be bigger than the enemy's numbers because your numbers are what makes you win.
It's basically Top Trumps the video game, but with lots of more stuff.
Yeah, and it's gotten more complicated. Like it started out with stuff like Final Fantasy, which was just sort of you hit them, then they take a turn and they hit you, and that you basically got to see who runs out of health first.
Yeah, the turn-based battling is a sort of very interesting thing to me because I never got into turn-based battling games in any form. I've tried and tried and tried to play them, but I never get on with them. It just boggles the mind how that's supposed to be interesting.
Whereas for me, like, it seems natural because the first game that I got really heavily into was Pokemon. And that's all about sort of numbers and stats. And
yeah, I played one Pokemon game, and to be fair, I got my first Pokemon game in Gibraltar, which is an island that belongs to the British, but it's in Spain. But I went there on a day trip from a resort in Spain, went on a sort of excursion to go visit the town there, and it was awesome. And the main reason to go there is everything's cheap because they don't have as many taxes as the UK does. So I went there, and my first ever Pokemon game was this one that came on a 56-in-1 cartridge for the Game Boy something or other, Game Boy Color, I believe. And yeah, this thing was poorly translated from Vietnamese into English.
It was so bad.
And there was so much swearing in it, and I didn't understand what was going on. I honestly didn't know that you could change your Pokemon around in the computer because it never explained it.
Yeah, like this was Pokemon Crystal, if you're interested in the particular version.
Yeah, that's
the
one.
It was so bad. And it's a shame because that's arguably the best generation of Pokemon games. By comparison, my experience was I had it in English. I got into Pokemon Red, and I remember in the village that I grew up in that there were sort of little events that were quite quaint, as you imagine in the village, and the kids would literally be just wandering around playing Pokemon and talking to each other about playing Pokemon, and that was how big that was where I grew up. But there's these numbers that are in these games they still exist, but in modern games they're not so much.
Yeah, this is a weird thing as well, talking about going back to our childhoods briefly. I grew up right in the middle of the inner city, so I had to stay indoors and play consoles indoors, and my first video game that I owned was Eternal Champions on the Sega Mega Drive, or the Genesis if you're in America. And it's an amazing fighting game. And that was like the first thing I really properly played.
And then Sega Japan were like, but we want Virtua Fighter instead.
Yeah, that's a story for another time perhaps, of why they ruined my favourite video game ever.
We will go over that at some point.
But
anyway,
the point is that I very much grew up with fighting games, not turn-based battling games.
Yeah, and fighting games are a different beast. there's still numbers in fighting games, I can tell you. Like they're all still in there, but you don't have like a big wall of stats that you read them from. You just pick up the character and have a play with it, and you get a feel for it.
This is the thing I wanted to actually sort of go across, because I used to love my fighting games. I'm a hardcore fighting game fanatic. I have every Tekken game bar a couple that I'm missing because I just didn't have the console they were on.
One of the first things I knew about you was that you loved fighting games.
I loved fighting games. I played a lot of the Mortal Kombat games. I don't own any of them anymore, sadly. They've all sort of disappeared over the years, or they are unplayable because I don't have a computer that will run them anymore. But one of the weird things about a lot of fighting games today, like since sort of the PS2-ish era, is that you get a really strong sense of how a character will play just by picking it up and trying it. And that's kind of why you have these training arenas. You take that character into the training arena and play around with it, get a feel for how fast it is, how hard it hits, and see whether you're interested in playing it all the way through. I loved all of those games, and I've got to know them quite well, and how all the different characters play, and which ones are my favourites and which ones I don't like to play as. And this is kind of the strange thing about fighting games, is they're very much, you pick them up and you get the feel for them. With RPGs, it's not like that in the slightest. You get to know the characters intimately by looking at their stats, and the way their attacks work, and the way their specials work, or whatever it is that they have in their particular version of the game.
Yeah, and if you go back to the era in time when World of Warcraft first came out, and the sort of MMORPGs that came out at that time, the ones that are regarded the highest tended to have the biggest walls of numbers. Like I'm going to get a screenshot of World of Warcraft, and it's going to be mostly numbers, because there's just a lot of data there, and because of the way the gameplay functions, you can maximise your power by knowing those numbers quite intimately. But in more recent games, we're seeing a shift away from this, and Warframe's the big example that we want to talk about here eventually. But there's been other games that have shifted away from this. So if you take Tekken as an example, there's numbers there, but you don't see them.
Yeah, you don't see them. The numbers exist purely in the programming and nowhere else, essentially. It's more about your tactile way of using the character. But there are certainly games out there that marry the whole numbers and tactile feel thing really well. One of my best examples of this, a game that very few people have played because it was on the PSP, is Dissidia, and Dissidia Duodecim. I don't know why they called it that. Dissidia 2, essentially. Or 012 if you have a different version of the packaging. Strange naming conventions there, thank you, Square Enix.
Guess which country that's from? Japan.
We all know it's from Japan. But yeah, Dissidia was an interesting beast because it basically played like a strategy RPG, except for when it didn't, because it was also a fighting game in a wide open arena. The strangest thing I'd ever seen, and it's worked really well because there was a lot of strategy involved. You could equip items, equip armour and all that. You could equip breakable items that gave you really short-lived stat boosts and all that sort of thing.
Lots of RPG elements in a fighting game.
Yeah, loads of RPG elements. But the fighting part of it itself was really nice. It was smooth. You could sort of grind on things in the arena so that you could sort of skid around the arena at lightning speed. And the basic gameplay sort of involved you building up your attack by attacking. So you attacked with certain attacks to build up your health point attack, which is a bit strange. I'm not very well explained by myself.
I've never grasped this. I need to actually play it to grasp it. It's a shame I can't give you any footage of this. Dissidia was very good because it gave you basically options so that you could go into all these RPG elements in the game and you could mess with all the numbers just like you can in many RPGs. But if you wanted, you could just sort of set it all to automatic and the game would give you what would be broadly the best for what you wanted. And if you tweaked it, you could probably get something slightly better, but the differences would only be there if you really, really cared to notice.
What was also very interesting was you could unlock a, what do you call it?
Turn-based system?
Turn-based system.
Yes.
Yeah, you could actually unlock a turn-based battling mode, but, like, why would you? It was actually, the fighting part was the best part about the game.
I think it's more for, like, that sort of retro Final Fantasy turn-based feel.
Yeah, and it was also awesome that you could play as, like, characters like Sephiroth and that really campy guy from Final Fantasy IX, whose name I can never remember, but he's purple and really camp.
I don't know. I have not played many Final Fantasy games.
Look, to be fair, like, most of the characters in that game didn't actually have names because they didn't have names in the original games. So there was like this one character called Onion Knight, and like then there was this guy called the Hero of Light or something. It was...
No, that's actually one of the characters from the very first one. I think they were called Heroes of Light. But anyway, so that was a very good marriage of numbers and sort of real-time gameplay. And Warframe, going back to our main example in this now, Warframe's a brilliant example of how this can be done well in a way that is... It has all the numbersy features and all the accessibility to the numbers that mathematical people like myself will really enjoy and really get into and probably bore all of our friends to death with. But it's set out in such a way that, A, for the most part, you can actually ignore it, apart from just sort of making sure that you've got equipment equipped. And B, if you do want to look at it, you are not looking at a huge page of lots of different numbers and trying to remember how they all interact. The way it's laid out makes it very easy to compare and contrast what you've got. So you've got these, they're mod cards, and they have like different stat boosts. So there's one that just gives you more melee damage, one that gives you more health.
I think basically the gist of it is people like me can play it because you can just sort of wade in and smash everything. And that makes me very happy because I love games where you can just wade in and smash things.
And it's a skill-based game. Like if you don't have the best stats, it's not going to make as much of a difference as actually just trying to play cleverly. And like I said, they're there and they do make a difference, but they're no longer the focus of how it all plays as they would have been in older games. And that changes the accessibility to suit the modern games market, where not everyone is these sort of numbersy, sort of hidden in a basement nerds, which they weren't necessarily before, but that was the stereotype that was being played to.
Yeah, I think this is a weird shift we've seen in the market in the last sort of 10-15 years or more, that slowly things have been pushing away from that trying to emulate Dungeons and Dragons type of gameplay towards something a little bit more action focused. And I don't think it's purely because the gaming market has changed, but the hardware has changed drastically. We now can have these big things, these big battles. I mean, we were just talking today about the new Monster Hunter game. I'm betting anything that the only reason it has recently become more open world is because they can now. Yeah,
the hardware's caught up.
The reason so many games have become open world games is because we just can. We can do it. We have the power and the technology and all of that. And we have the money to do it these days. And I absolutely don't believe that argument that games are too expensive to make. That's for another day, though.
Yeah, it's an entirely different conversation. But one of the weird things that we've noticed now, because we've both only recently started playing Warframe, and we thought, okay, so there's like, what, 30 Warframes to choose from? Which ones do we want? And we found some ones that we like the look of and decided to actually look up some guides to them and how that works. And every guide that we looked at, and all the top rated guides that we saw as videos on YouTube, they all started out with these guys just listing a bunch of numbers. And we haven't played the game that much. We don't have any context for these numbers. I have no idea if 300 armor is great or terrible.
Yeah, this is something I was pointing out earlier, that literally one of the videos, I'm not going to name names because that would be incredibly mean.
And the videos aren't bad either.
They aren't bad videos.
They're just not for us.
Yeah, we just had specific problems that are more on our end than theirs. But one of the things I was pointing out was that the guy said that, I believe it was Titania, was a particularly squishy Warframe to play as, because she only had 100 health, I want to say.
Yeah.
And yet talked about another Warframe in a different video having 150 health, and that was apparently really great. And I was like, well, what's the difference? That doesn't sound like a lot.
Yeah, it doesn't.
How do you... It's like, health could mean just about anything. And we came to realise this point, that health could just mean just about anything, depending on the context of the point system, really. That came out really weird. But
no, but yeah, it's about context.
Yeah, what I mean is, like, 100 health could be huge or nothing, dependent on how hard the enemies are to defeat. Like, if your enemy character, like your basic level character, hits you for 1 health point, then, like, yeah, 100 health is brilliant. If they hit you for 50 health points each time,
yeah, you're going to go down like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah, it's really terrible. So how do you know? Like, a little context is needed. Obviously, that video didn't work for a complete beginner. Like,
yeah, it would have been absolutely perfect for someone who's played the game a lot, and that's the market it was aimed at, and it wasn't what we were after. But we would have benefited, and we've struggled to find something that just says, like, there's this Warframe, and this Warframe is quite fragile and will die quite quickly, but the trade-off is that you can control large groups of enemies and stop from being overwhelmed, or that this Warframe is nigh impossible to kill, but it's not going to sort of take out huge swathes of enemies at once. You've really got to focus on one.
Yeah, I
time.
think the point is that while numbers are all very well and good, and they're basically the basis of video games in a sense.
Yeah.
Without context and without knowing how numbers work, they're kind of meaningless in the larger scheme, you know, like in a grander sense. They're kind of meaningless to you unless you really know what to do with them.
Yeah, and Warframe's kind of gotten away from the numbers having that much meaning. I mean, there's a wide variety of Warframes now, but they all largely play the same. Like, you've got your sort of standard run around, shooting controls, sort of jump, slide, bullet time through the air like a sort of robot ninja Superman, you know, the usual stuff. But the actual differences between the Warframes are relatively minor, but enough that it's a definite difference. I mean, you've got Warframes that freeze things. There's all the elements. You've got ice, fire, electricity, air, down to some weird stuff, like there's ones that teleport, and there's one that uses is it Titania uses razor butterflies?
Yeah, that's weird. I like I like Octavia as well, who uses music.
Yeah.
Oh god, it's basically Footloose. It's basically Footloose the robot.
Yeah.
The power of music and dancing will solve all your problems.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of really cool stuff, and like some really weird stuff. I can't remember the name of the infected one, but an image of that will be coming up on your screen at the moment, and it looks awful.
Yeah,
like it's very powerful, but it looks like something like a cross between the Zerg and the Tyranids.
It's just covered in tumours. It's horrid.
Yeah.
Really, really cool, apparently.
Yeah.
But I was going to say as well, speaking about a few other games just very briefly, Skyrim is a huge example of a game that tried to get away from its numbersy past.
Yes.
The Elder Scrolls games, like the very first couple, you'll see that we played at least one on our channel.
Yeah, we've done Daggerfall. We are going to do more of that.
Yeah, like in the past, they were crazy full of numbers. Right up until Oblivion. Even Oblivion, I found, was a little overwhelming on its numbers, and it still had cut back quite drastically. But then you get to Skyrim, where there's literally like 3 stats that you can sort of level up all
Yeah,
the way
like
through.
you've got your sort of like individual stats for individual skills, but those are sort of just flat numbers, and you always take them on their own. It gets complicated when you have to compare a lot of numbers at once and see the correlation between them and how that affects your gameplay.
I played Skyrim very differently from you then, because I remember there were 3 stats at the bottom of the screen that you could upgrade, and then you had your sort of weird
skills.
star chart things that you could upgrade, and that was about it. Like, I don't remember there being much else, and I remember being pretty impressed at the time, thinking, oh wow, they've really sort of dumbed this down for people like me. Like, not so much dumbed it down, but
they've just made it more accessible.
They streamlined it like crazy so that you could play more and have to worry about the stats screen less.
Yeah.
Which was a massive problem I had with a certain game called Kingdoms of Amalur,
God.
where I had to spend so long on the stats screen trying to work out what I was supposed to do with it half the time.
It didn't help that they'd gotten the UI scaling off, so it was difficult to read stuff. Like, I had a 20-inch screen to play that on, and it was literally too small for the writing to be legible.
I will go one worse. My TV the TV I had to play that on at the time was an old CRT TV.
So standard definition.
And the contrast was broken on it, so the screen was a little bit too dark no matter how high I turned up the game.
Oh my god.
So it was near impossible for me to play that game. And Skyrim was such a refreshing break, because I could read that without much effort, and I could be just like, yeah, want to put all my points in that, and I want to unlock that, and I'm done. And now I can get back to slaughtering wolves.
Yeah, but don't feel that, because this is a thing that I see in the gaming industry a lot, especially with elitist gamers. If you are one of those people who likes video games and you can't do numbers very well, don't let people tell you that means you're not smart enough. That's not it at all. It's just a matter of you seeing the world differently. And I want to get away from that negative association with just not being a numbersy person. It's just not the person you are, and that's fine.
And also, conversely, if people also pick on you because you are a numbersy person and they call you a nerd or a geek for it, that's fine too. There's no harm in having those skills. In fact, I'm quite jealous of people who are really good at maths, because I took art and everybody hates artists.
Yeah, and I make a living out of doing maths, so you know, if you like maths, you're on the right track.
And I don't make a living out of doing art. If you're doing art, stop!
It's not that bad. It is a harsh industry, but be warned. But so to sum up, we're seeing this change and this trend in how the games work, but not in how the community support works. We're still seeing all this very numbers-focused stuff. And perhaps we want to look at some no-numbers guides to some of these.
Yeah, I would be very interested to see some guides that not so much dumb down things, but maybe try something a little more basic and a little bit more
more focused on visually
visuals.
Recognising what's going on.
Yeah. Something that's a little bit simpler and a little bit easier to take on board initially. Having pages and pages of numbers read out to you is really hard to follow, even if you are somebody who's good at maths.
I will vouch for that. It is. So, but it's we'll have a look into it. We'll see what we can do. But I think that's everything we had to say on the matter at this point.
Yeah, we're trying this new podcast format, so please let us know if you're enjoying this and if you'd like to hear something a little bit more loose and just us discussing a topic that we feel very strongly about.
Yeah, and do comment. We read your comments because we don't get that many of them.
We'll answer them if you really want us to.
No, I answer everything. I make a point of it. But it's so encouraging to see that someone has sort of watched enough of the video to write something down about it, so that you'd really be just helping our self-esteems. And if you want to help our channel, you can click that subscribe button, because we put up new videos every Thursday and Sunday. We're very dedicated to this, to the point that we're recording this at 3:15 on a Sunday morning technically now.
Yeah,
we've stayed up very, very late.
Yeah, this is actually kind of normal for me. Normally I'm going to bed in about 2 hours' time.
Yeah, Carmen's like a night owl.
I'm an artist. We all are like that. And a writer, so...
Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much for watching and listening, guys. And hopefully you'll want to see more of our content. And we will see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.